welcome. um, this is empathy in action. Um, I'm not sure. I can never see how many people are watching this from Restream. So I can see the chat. So if you are here, feel free to say hi in the comments or later on down the road when you are watching it on the recording. So either way, we're watching the comments if they come in. All right. So welcome to Empathy in Action, exploring trauma-informed decision-making skills. If you are watching this and want to refer to the visuals with this, you can go take your phone if you're not on it or some other tablet, and you can scan the QR code up here to get a direct reference to the visual that Sarah and I are referring to. Anyway, what's this overlay? Oh, there's the overlay. So now we can see the comments over here. Okay, cool. That's good. Good news feature. Every time I get on here, I'm always like, what's a
new fun tech?
Anyway, so welcome. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about what does a trauma-informed decision-making process look like? And what is the and really, for us, what does it look like within a business concept? Like, we know that it's non-clinical. Integrate Trauma Informed Network specializes in non-clinical development of trauma-informed skills. And we're talking now about what does a trauma-informed decision-making process look like from more of a neurological lens, but also from like a project management lens as well, almost like a self-regulation lens, but also with like a process and a plan in place, which is always the thing we're looking at whenever we start talking about any of these kind of more human-centered processes in the business world. So without that to say, I'm Julie Johnson. I am the co-founder of Integrate Trauma Informed Network. Integrate Trauma Informed Network is a community of practice of what's it called? Of integrated, I would say, I hate to say that, but like intersectional, integrated disciplines, multidisciplinary professionals who are working within the human care industry. It might be mental health, it might be wellness, it might be education, but people that are facing the public. And then we also have a business side of people that are more working business to business, more on the macro level, right? And how do we use human-centered communication and trauma-informed decision-making skills to help us on our teams, create community, and also build inner resilience. So without that to say, Sarah's on here today talking with us about these aspects from a clinical lens. So Sarah's a member of our community. She's a social worker in Virginia and Maryland, right?
Yeah.
In Maryland, right. And so, Sarah, why don't you talk a little bit more about your work and kind of what's your passion in the world and why you're here?
Well, my passion is the same, right? That's the mission that we all talk about in Integrate, which is a trauma-informed future. And everybody like having a grasp of these concepts and principles and then able to apply these skills basically just to like reduce harm to people, right? So that we're just not adding to what already exists for a lot of people's lived experiences. I'm a clinician, by trade and profession. So my mind goes there a lot. I'm a practicing psychotherapist and I still see clients every week. And so my mind does go to the clinical piece a lot. However, I'm a super neuroscience geek and find that stuff just like really interesting and actually maybe the most tangible thing that I do in my clinical work because it's stuff you can kind of sink your teeth into that makes sense to people like once it's explained in a way, right? Like people sort of grab onto this is how it works, in the brain physiologically. And that can be for like everybody to understand them, not only for themselves, but in spaces with other people and what that looks like and how that comes down in decision making. So as a result, I am pivoting some of my clinical skills in my work with Integrate and some others to educate, right? And hopefully get to some business to business consulting on this kind of stuff. I talk to people all day, every day, and lots of diverse people. And so I enjoy that. And I'm happy to do that with anybody and kind of work on this together, right? Dive into this together collaboratively.
So we're going to be working through the framework again that you can scan up here. It's also on my LinkedIn page, Julie at Julie Johnson, and you can see the full framework as well. But it's a 5-step phase of looking at how we learn to make trauma-informed decisions, right? And the first one that Sarah and I are talking about is kind of this concept of self-leadership, right? Of learning to sense our activations, right? Or some people would call them triggers. We call them activations. They've been upgraded in the world of mental and behavioral health. So they're calling them activations now, formerly called triggers. So, how do we sense our activations, right? So, Sarah, what do you have to say more about that from like a clinical lens? And I'll kind of add in some tools once you kind of round that out.
Right. Like we talk about the problem and then solutions, right? And it's like number one is big on that. Like, I'm not sure that we can get to solutions if we don't have an understanding of number one. If you don't know what an activation looks like, trigger, right? If you don't even understand what that concept means, it's like we got some work to do, got some self work to do. From my perspective, I think it would be nearly impossible to engage in any sort of trauma-informed decision making if you don't have self-awareness about your own activation, and if you haven't done your own work to find a place of rebalance and safety to then re-engage. Right. So number one is we got to look inward.
Okay. Looking inward. So can you talk a little bit more about what you doing your own work means? We hear that a lot, but like, tell me, like, give me examples.
Yeah. So I will just take it from the therapeutic standpoint because this is how I talk about it with clients, right? Some people, and I think a lot of people, have this concept of therapy, psychotherapy, right? Going in to see your therapist as like that's it, like that's gonna work. Like you show up, which is great, right? You show up to your appointments, you're present, you engage, you share, then that's it till the next week or 2 weeks or month or whatever. Doing your own work is like not only doing that part and showing up and being consistent, but it's doing the work outside of that. I'll equate it some to like some physical health things or physical issues because that maybe translates a little better. Like if you go to physical therapy, they maybe do some hands-on work, they manipulate stuff, they have you stretch or kind of do some things, right, to see where you are, to assess the issue, to try to fix a little bit of stuff for you, and then to sort of send you out to do some stuff at home. Physical therapy always sends you with a home program. If you're not doing your home program, you're not going to see a lot of progress from your appointments there. It's not going to withstand, right? It's not going to sustain. Like what they did to sort of readjust and fix some things and smooth it out is not going to stick if you don't do your at-home program. It's like the same if you show up to your PCP and you have high blood pressure, right? They assess that, they determine that, and then they prescribe the medicine. Well, you actually have to go take it. Just showing up to the appointment, learning what you have, and learning about a solution, right? A medicine does not actually apply the solution to you. You have to then go take the medicine. You have to then go do your home program for physical therapy. In our self work or in psychotherapy work, you have to go beyond what you're doing in session with your therapist or coach or whomever, mentor, and self-reflect, potentially journal, get perspective, maybe have conversations with others that you're comfortable with or close to you, like your family or people that know you well. It requires more than just the showing up and I was here and I shared. I kind of find that some people want to talk about the problem and then some people really want to look for a solution to the problem, and the ones that aren't doing the work sort of outside just really want to talk about the problem.
And I think I was gonna say, I want to say one thing about that because I think sometimes with YouTube and TikTok, some people are like, well, I follow I follow mental health channels, and I think the thing that I always tell people is, but no one is there giving you perspective shifts to widening the lens of the story you're telling yourself. Right? Which could be based in trauma. It might be, and is it accurate? Is it accurate? And I think that that's always the big thing I always try to tell people is that's where like, in mental health, that's for sure the biggest thing about therapy versus watching therapeutic content is there's that perspective shift, that widening that lens, to help you sort of see a narrative that you may not be seeing.
Yeah, and some of that is based on context. And so when
Yeah.
you're watching on TikTok or YouTube or whatever, those therapists have like good views, but the context, they don't know your context,
Yeah.
right? Your history, your current
Mhm.
circumstances, where things are. Like that is a huge part of my clinical work is like really understanding where my clients are and what's going on around them, not just in the therapy room or inside themselves. Like what is their job like? What is their family like? What is their home life like? You know, do they have kids? Do they have pets? What's going on? That's important piece to somebody's specific perspective sometimes, or then being able to help them shift that perspective. It's knowing what context.
Absolutely. Okay, so moving on to number 2, then again, there's again the context, right? Understanding our spectrum of safeness, right? That is also goes with context. So, like when we understand, at least for me, and I'll speak for myself, when I was able to, because I've been through like quite a bit of therapy, and I still, refer to therapists and and mental health support groups to help me at this stage of my own work and self-leadership. I feel like we're talking about us, looking at what feels safe to me, because that can only be done by us,
Mhm.
like we can't really I can't really tell Sarah what's safe for Sarah.
That's right.
Sarah has to do that work for herself. And so even if I want something to be safe, I know I have no control over that for another person. And so I think it's important for us within the context to also understand our that sense of safety. What is safety, right? And so assessing our spectrum of safeness. So for some people, I would call that in the somatic therapy or the somatic yoga world, because I'm a yoga teacher in in other spaces. That's called your window of tolerance,
Mhm.
right? What feels safe to you? Right? Can you speak to more of that like sense of that window of tolerance, or we call it the window of self-compassion sometimes in
Yeah.
some circles? Can you speak through that to that?
Yeah. And so what I didn't say when we were talking about number one, I'll bring it in here, is the neuroscience piece,
Yeah.
right? And this is really enhanced not only
Mhm.
my like clinical skills and being able to do things therapeutically with my clients, but also my understanding of how activations happen, how the brain
Right.
works, what's going on physiologically.
Right.
So when an activation happens, it's like back here in the limbic system, which is the reptilian brain. It's the least developed part of our brain. And it fires rapidly, and it fires before your prefrontal cortex can get a hold of it, which is where we have executive functioning, language, moral reasoning, decision making. All that happens in the prefrontal cortex. So when you're activated, you're back here in limbic system, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Those are the things that people know. And like sensory information hits the limbic system before it hits the prefrontal cortex every single time. It's a survival mechanism. We needed to do that. We need your body to be able to act in a time of danger. We don't want to be stuck thinking about it first and then acting. That's why that physiological mechanism is in place. It is for safety. And so when I think about that, it's like you can't even get to thinking about safety until you've sort of rebalanced. We can't get into decision making until we're out of our limbic system
Mhm.
and our prefrontal cortex is back online. Fun neuroscience fact, folks: the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex don't operate at the same time. If the limbic system is online, the prefrontal cortex is offline. So your ability to communicate, think, reason, make a decision, way low.
And if you're not doing that and you're trying to make decisions, quality of the decisions may need to be assessed.
Yeah,
Because
because you
because
maybe weren't your full present self when you were doing it.
well, that's what I was saying, like, when we're making decisions out of, let's call it trauma, because that's what we do here. If we're ba we're pro we there's a possibility of us projecting,
Indeed.
right? And so that's where why these first 2 steps of this framework is really important, because that lets us know when we are, um, in our how do I say this? How when we are in, um
Our nervous system
in our nervous system regulated. I'm trying to find other, like, words to use
works.
besides nervous system words, but, like,
Body.
in our space, in our bodies,
Yeah.
clear understanding what's happening around us,
Mhm.
right? Before we make those decisions. Because I don't know about you, but when I'm in my most agitated, activated spaces, the decisions I make highly questionable. You know?
Right. Yes.
So
And that's because, right, we're not in like moral reasoning. We're in
right,
emotion reaction, right?
right,
And some of that, right, if it's a trauma response or trauma activation is a survival, it's a danger, right? Like
right,
we hit fight, flight, freeze because it's a perceived danger. So any decision you're making out of that is for your own self-preservation because your whole physiology, your brain, your body is designed to keep you alive and safe. So we're not even other focused when we're activated because it's
right,
all like, I'm unsafe, I gotta get better. Yeah, kind of a
right.
space.
And so one thing like as like so I coach a lot on trauma informed mindfulness when I start doing like coaching in the whether it's business world, I'm working in the wellness world, right? There's an underlying piece to everything I do that's based in trauma informed mindfulness, which is a part of decision making, right? And I love to teach people about trauma informed mindfulness first because it teaches about one how to recognize where our body is in space. So we call it
Mhm.
proprioception first. Okay. Where is my body in space? Where are my feet connected to the ground? Right. Um, and another space, maybe we'll do a mindfulness activity on here sometime. But till then, we're gonna kind of
We'll
talk
talk
about
about it.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
We'll
um
practice later.
we'll practice later. But trauma informed mindfulness is good because first we have to become aware of our bodies and not necessarily how our bodies feel inside, because I realize that's not always accessible, but it's where is my body in space? That's why I love proprioception. Where are my shoulders? Where are my hands? Like when I love putting like one hand on my heart and one hand on my
Yeah.
forehead, just noticing that my hand is on my forehead. And like that sometimes is the first way I learn how to notice my body if I'm really in a space where I can't access it,
Yeah.
like cognitively or mentally. It's always like hand on head, hand on heart. First step. Okay, remember your body is breathing you. And then,
Yeah.
and that's all like, and I love doing that. And then a tool to help me
Great.
use that is called
Okay.
Headspace.
Oh, yeah.
And I love Headspace because Headspace does teach you to recognize your body and how the body is breathing and how you're breathing as a form of learning to feel, or at least begin to be curious about what safeness can feel like to you and what your own relationship to safeness is. Notice I'm not saying safety. Safeness means that you might not feel fully safe, but there's a curiosity about what safety could be. Okay. And
Mhm.
so I'll always say safeness versus safety because safety feels very defined, whereas safeness feels a little bit more like
Open-ended.
it's an open ended process
Yeah.
because it is.
Yeah.
It's an open ended process.
And
What
it's
about
evolutionary, right? Like even our own safeness or what feels safe to us changes over time,
totally?
which is partly why the self-awareness, the lifelong learning, the gaining of perspective like never ends, right? And
Right.
we talk about that with trauma informed anyways, is you just have to be willing to continue to learn because there's no end. And that's kind of true about yourself because we're dynamic individuals, and we're
Mhm.
changing all the time. The only constant is that change happens.
Someone just said trauma informed yoga is great. Yes, I'm a trauma informed
Yes.
yoga teacher. I don't talk about that often on LinkedIn, but yes, there is. I am a trauma informed yoga teacher, so I'm having a hard time not transcending totally into yoga speak at the moment. So I'm having a little bit of clash of my professional identities at the moment, but they all go together,
Yeah.
right? Learning to recognize our body is trauma informed yoga.
Yep.
Being curious about where our body is in space is trauma informed yoga. It's trauma informed mindfulness, and it's being mindful of how my activations are impacting my body, right?
Mhm.
That's like the first step to anything we do is noticing our bodies.
And the key point about mindfulness that you say that I just kind of want to touch on, it's present minded awareness, right?
Yeah.
So mindfulness is not like something in the future or something in the past. It's right now. It's being aware of yourself, your body right now. Like you said, spatially, where is it? If we can access inside internally what's happening, it's not a projection or a historical thing. It's a present moment live action kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, if anyone wants to talk more trauma informed yoga, feel free to send me a DM. That's like a whole other part of my professional life. But yes, and we'll continue to talk more about it here. But it starts there. And understanding safeness is like around all of these, the root of, a decision making. Okay. Anything else on that, Sarah?
Um, no.
Okay. All right. So the next one we're going to is promoting personal agency, right? Wow. So personal agency is what I would call in the business world customization. So when I say personal agency, and if
Okay.
you're like, okay, what's agency? It means customization. It means how can I make this work for me in now in any situation, and how can I change it? How can I change and be flexible as conditions around me change, right?
Right. Okay.
And in agents with personal agency, it's and it's giving ourselves freedom to make different choices based off the conditions around us as conditions change, right? And
Mhm.
that's the cool thing about decision making is I can make a decision today and realize something's happening. This isn't good for me or my team. I need to customize. I need to create agency. We need to shift gears into something else. That's collective agency or customization, as I call it.
Instead of trying to go the way you've been going, but it's not working, instead of
Right.
like evaluating and like pivoting or adjusting or changing course, right? So some of the agency, yes, having to recognize like this isn't working and it requires a change. And then, like you said, being open and willing to adjust, to step into that change.
And
Um,
I
not
think
always
it's go ahead. Were you gonna sorry, I was
it's just not always easy, but like it's yeah, it's a necessary piece.
yeah. And I think the other piece too is that you were speaking of is I think that that's really hard when you're coming into when you're working with people and we're working in set systems, right? I
Mhm.
think that it can be hard to there's a lot that goes into customization, right? But I think for ourselves it can create safety within so we know what safeness looks like, what do I need in order to have personal agency. I need to be able to make choices for myself. Like for me, when I'm in a leadership position and there's a lot of trenches, as I say, relationally in situations, I need to know that, um, that I have the freedom to at least make small choices, like with technology, right? I switch technology in little ways that work for me, right? So I try to find little customized ways to, make like little adjustments with it might be like, okay, we're going to do Zoom versus Google Meets.
Okay.
So I try to find these little points of shifting if I need to remind myself that I can still make decisions for myself that are, to our best benefit, so it's learning to recognize, how we can make personal agency in these small little ways. Sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes it's just I have as much freedom as to know I can change my breath in a moment because I have a lot of restrictions over me. And I
Right.
just want to speak to that because lots of times in positions, like I know Sarah, we've talked a lot about as a clinician, like sometimes we feel like the only decisions we can make for ourselves and sometimes in systems is how we are breathing in the moment, and recognizing our breath.
Yep.
But psychologically understanding where we can find agency and where we can find that freedom to a certain degree, no matter what restrictions are around us, can really help us move forward into some decision making aspects. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm sort of picking up on what you're saying here as with personal agency is like a choice,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And like having options or choices, even ones that you create for yourself, help people not to feel stuck.
Right.
And to move through an activation, we have to get unstuck, right? Like so having choices helps us do that. And, we were just talking the other day when we met about the Zoom Google Meet thing. And that choice for you is like a personal shift because the platform and the interface with Zoom you've used more, you're more comfortable with, and
Right.
that flows, right? Yeah.
Right.
So it's like everybody's like, well, what's a big deal? It's just a video thing. And it's like, but for you, that little choice, like boost confidence, maybe
Right.
helps you feel more present, right?
Right.
Like so then you're less like in your body, maybe having to deal with something and you could be more like present with what's happening around you, right? Because you made a choice, even if a small one, that like worked better for you.
Right. And I think it's important to just always understand those moments because I think what I hear from a lot of leaders is well, I just don't have any freedom. I don't have the freedom to make those choices.
Yeah.
I get a lot of freedom for that. And I think my reflection back for that is always, but you can make small choices in your own, maybe, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, 13 hours, 14 hours, 15 hours, 16 hours, 17 hours, 18 hours, 19 hours, 20 hours, 21 hours, 22 hours, 23 hours, 24 hours, 25 hours, 26 hours, 27 hours, 28 hours, 29 hours, 30 hours, 31 hours, 32 hours, 33 hours, 34 hours, 35 hours, 36 hours, 37 hours, 38 hours, 39 hours, 40 hours, 41 hours, 42 hours, 43 hours, 44 hours, 45 hours, 46 hours, 47 hours, 48 hours, 49 hours, 50 hours, 51 hours, 52 hours, 53 hours, 54 hours, 55 hours, 56 hours, 57 hours, 58 hours your framework ability to make those choices is that big. But what can you do in those situations to remind yourself that you can make choices for yourself that are for you, that help you,
Mhm.
right? So I think especially because in systems of care where there might be a lot of bureaucracy
Yeah.
above us, I think it's always important for us to understand those because I mean, I work in several of those systems, you right? And so anyway, so that's kind of just a reflection on like how agency can look from like a business angle. Do you have anything else to say on like the neuroscience of agency and personal
Mm,
choices?
okay, so the only thing I want to say about the personal agency, right, and like understanding this, and we're talking about like self-awareness, be able to
Mhm.
lead from a trauma-informed perspective, is that you have to be able to take accountability for yourself, right? Compassionate accountability. Don't beat yourself up. But if you have not communicated well, if you did not deliver information well, if you, I don't know, experienced an activation and then didn't, lead well in some sort of way, even if it's after the fact and you recognize that occurred, then own it, then come back, be honest about it, do your own work with it, right? You might have to do that first. You might have to look at that. It might be hard. You have to humble yourself. Like that's some people's work already, and looking at that. But then I think that that's part of it is just sort of recognizing, like, okay, I get it. This is me. It maybe didn't land well. I'm working on other ways, right? I can find those little choices or
Mhm.
pay more attention to myself so I can make a different decision before this happens. But it goes just such a long way to name it,
Mhm.
rather than hide from it.
Yeah, and I think naming the choice, especially when it comes to leadership or errors or places where we
Yeah,
were, were
nervous.
misguided and we caused harm, you have the agency to make a different choice. And I think that that is something that cannot be said enough is that you have the personal agency to make different choices. And we don't have to continue causing the same harm, right? That we
Right.
can make we can make a different choice, whether it comes to any sort of situation, accessibility, it comes to, small technological or interpersonal, right? So
Mhm.
I think that that's kind of, it's that, what did we talk about whatever in with Brene Brown's work today? It was that it's that self-compassion,
Yeah.
and also it's that empathy to self, but also with also understanding where harm has been made, right?
Yeah, the last piece I'll say about that I did looking at here that's probably important. It can be hard for people, right? Like it's either hard to look at your own stuff or to know what those are. Especially, I'll say maybe if people are a little bit like me and get stuck sort of in a negative loop about themselves, try using a dialectical statement, right? A both and. How can you
Mhm.
use a both and to create a choice as
Yeah.
well? Like how can it doesn't have to be either or, right? Or black and white, this or that. It's like it could be this and this, so it could be like I have to do this because this is how it's designed, or I don't have choice over this, and I do have choice over this, right? So it's putting those two things in the same frame, maybe recognizing where you don't, and then flipping that and recognizing where you do, right? So if you're in a system or agency or under somebody else, like you said, there are some things you don't have control over. But can we blend that maybe in the same frame with, like, well, what do I have control over? Both, and not getting stuck in one camp or the other.
Right, and it can be empowering to remember those small things, are still steps,
Yeah.
in that direction, and I think that that's as someone who's led in systems that can be really challenging, those can be really psychologically helpful from a trauma-informed leadership perspective,
Yeah.
I was like I mean, I always say, like, I'll never forget when it is more on a on a well, it's all personal, but, like, in my own my own work, with my therapist, I used to be like the first thing that this app that she had me do was learning how to, like, drink water every day. I was in a really bad space, and the only goal I had was to drink water every morning. It wasn't even a whole glass, just to remember to drink water,
Yes. I do the same thing with some of my clients. You'd be surprised. Yeah.
you know?
And we have to start with, like, we can't do anything else until you feel okay. Right. Like if you're severely dehydrated, we we can't do anything else, right? Like we can't go deeper into
Right,
ourselves if
right.
yeah, if there's not some stuff at least on the surface getting us back in touch.
So
Yeah.
let's recap. So review, we had assessing safety, right? Or assessing our personal safety. Sorry, not sorry, our personal activations. Understanding what those look like. Step 2 was understanding our own sense of safeness. Step 3 is knowing where we have customization, where we have personal agency or can make choices, right? So
Mhm.
that's where we are right now in our process of trauma informed decision making, right? In like a regulated, healthy mindset. Okay. Okay, the next step we have is evaluate capacity. Oh boy, this is huge.
Oh, yeah, right. Like,
Okay,
it's like if you get through the first 3 and get to this, it's like you thought you've done a lot of the work and it's like, whoop, a mountain just like kind of showed up. It's like those first 3 pieces are almost like the mini bites to the big bite with this. Yeah. They
right.
sort of lead up to this.
So, what do you think capacity means? Like, I know what it means for me in my like work of like in more like the tech coaching space. What does it mean for you? How do you like look at capacity in this like spectrum of the process of making a trauma informed decision for self leadership?
I sort of look at capacity as energy or bandwidth. I use those kind of interchangeably, capacity, energy, and bandwidth. Same kind of terms I use with my clients too, and for myself, right? And because sometimes I feel like capacity maybe doesn't fit, and those other things feel more true. Sometimes even for me, it's
Mhm.
like it's not that I don't have capacity, it's that I don't have bandwidth for that right now,
Right.
which is kind of the same thing as saying capacity, but it's like I could have capacity for that, but we got to shore up the bandwidth, right? Which might mean I need to sleep first and like do it tomorrow, right? Like I need to get good rest and reevaluate there. And so the other thing is also like capacity for what? So not only like do I have it, do I have energy at all for anything? Do I have energy for this?
Right.
Do I have space for this? Do I have
Right.
space for this for an hour or do I have space for this for 15 minutes? It's I guess that kind of sort of ties into all other 3 like we're talking about, right? Personal agency and understanding yourself and being able to pay attention to yourself. Yeah, so capacity for me is sort of how much can I hold or how much can I do before I break down?
Right, and is it gonna and you know what, I can't remember who said this, if I'm saying yes to this, I'm saying no to something else, right?
Yes. Yes.
I think that
Exactly.
that's a big determining factor for me is if I'm saying yes to, um, doing a LinkedIn Live right now, what am I saying no to, right now? I'm obviously saying no to something else because I'm only a human being, right? So, like, I like, that's just like a
Makes
minor
sense.
example, but I think
Yeah.
that it's important because in our society where we're like, okay, I want to push through, I want to push through, I want to say
Mhm.
yes to these things. Checking in for your capacity to see, do you have what you need to do it well?
That's
I
right.
think that that's really important because if we're tired, if we've overcommitted ourselves, which is common, asking ourselves, do I have the ability to deliver on this effectively right now with what I have
Yep.
is the end. I mean, it's not the end point of decision making. It's not because we have one more step, but
Yeah.
it's like it's the catalyst to whatever your plan's gonna be, which is step 5,
That's right.
right? And so
Which
I
then there
think
has to be wiggle room for that because it's not all gonna be static all the time.
right.
There's
Yeah.
gonna be change.
I mean, like for me, for example, I'm trying to think of a decision I was in recently. I think for me, like, at one point in time, I was more or lessly like doing like a job hunt, more or lessly, and it was exhausting, and I stopped. I kind of was like, okay, I'm just gonna start doing more consulting because like my capacity to do things well was minimized. So I stopped that and just started doing shifted over into consulting and stuff like that because the job hunt just wasn't like it was just exhausting and the
Draining.
climate was happening. It was draining.
Draining. Yeah.
I didn't have capacity to like run integrate and do all the things I love to do, passion projects, things like that,
Right.
because I was putting everything into that. I didn't have the capacity to do the other things well. So I made that decision to kind of let that go, because I don't feel like I knew what it would take in order for me to do some of those things, and I knew I couldn't do it well and stay mentally healthy, because job hunting right now is really tough.
Yeah.
It's tough in general, but right now it's really hard, and in some debate ways re-traumatizing, for
Yeah.
some people. It was certainly for me. So so that was one way that capacity, I didn't have the capacity for it. Now, ways where I feel like I do have capacity, right? I want to show examples, because I don't think we have a lot of
Okay.
examples of like
Yeah.
how I know something's in capacity for me.
Yes.
So I think for me, I love I'm always looking at, you know, it's more of those aligned values. It's for
Mhm.
me, I'm looking at, do I have the energy to do it, and is it aligned with my values, right? And if it is, then it's most likely a yes. I will find the energy to it, because there's usually
That's right.
energy behind it to make it work, you know? And, the other flip side is, if it's not in align with my values, it'll probably
You have
be a
less
no.
capacity.
And
Mm.
I probably won't find a lot of capacity to do it, and sometimes, we will do things we don't want to do, and that's okay, and sometimes that just, you just have to
Sometimes you have to.
you have to do it,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, a value is also a value, or not even a value, a survival mechanism is also getting your needs met, and that is money and bills, right?
That's right. Yep.
So I think that, having to move through those and look at your capacity through aligned values and through our, what do we have to need to survive, can help us look at, you know,
How
do
to
I
evaluate and make those decisions. Yeah,
Mhm.
about what we engage in and what we don't.
Yeah.
And this is such a huge thing. The system does not have it set up well for us to do this well in mental health care as therapists, especially if you work for somebody else, because they just want you to churn client after client. And that's a real fast way to burn out and be included there. And starting my own private practice and being able to do this, one of the things that I did not like, and one of the reasons that I was starting getting dissatisfied with my last job is that they were going to take over scheduling, like sort of in central office. And as a mental health therapist, like that doesn't drive that well for me, because I don't maybe want to put the two most challenging clients I have back to back because of capacity. I want to be able to sort of do that myself and line up my days with like what I know about my clients, to be able to do that well. Like you said, to be able to show up and be their therapist well, or be that clinician well. I can't have like 8 of my like most challenging, most energy using clients in a row that day. And so that little piece of like personal agency, me wanting to control my schedule, make sure that I have capacity to show up well in my role as a clinician.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and I think that that talks a lot about the personal agency that sometimes I think, that we have to, learn to assess is the schedule, right? Is how we, and that's, I mean, time is one something you can learn to control, and so for
Yeah.
some people, flexibility and time flexibility is huge.
Mhm.
It is for me,
Me too.
and so I think that's a value, for you,
Exactly.
that is a value for you. Now, some people I know that they love to have that set time, like I do 8 to 5, and that set time is their little square of
That's
safeness,
right.
you
Yep.
that feels really safe, and then they go into the entrepreneurial world and they're like, "Oh my god, no." You know what I mean?
Yes,
It's too much
exactly.
safe, it's too much space.
Yeah. And that's sort of like knowing yourself, right? Like if that's
Right.
not you, then yeah, that's the whole point of what we're talking about. Then you got to know where you're going to thrive. You got to know where you're going to be able to show up best and what that means with inside of you, right? And with outside of you, to the best of your ability, right? We're still talking about there are plenty of things we all have to do that we don't want to do. And sometimes they're at inopportune times. But as often as you can reflect, sort of take a self inventory and say, where am I? Like, can I move this? Can I not? I really don't have capacity.
Right. Does it move?
Yeah.
Is there something that can be moved, or can I move it? Or can I move it inside of myself?
Right. Right. Yes.
If not, then it's gonna be
Stop.
moved inside of myself somehow. Reframing, redirecting, you know, breathing,
Right.
finding those markers where you can, reevaluate, how it looks, like in trauma-informed yoga. I'm gonna go back to my trauma-informed yoga thing here. That's one thing I tell my yoga students is, you know, your mat might be the only space
Mhm.
where can engage with self decision making. Okay. and it's with your body.
That's
And and it's because it's true, because sometimes that's the only spaces, whether it's life or the systems we work in, where we can really learn to make those decisions for ourselves. Um, Amy Smith just said social
yes.
workers don't burn out because of clients. Generally, it's because of the system's lack of resources and support we have access to.
Yes, Amy,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I'm there all day, all day. Yeah,
Yeah.
I hate it. I'm not here for it. I want it to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, because like, and that's one thing I just always tell people, I'm like, just because, yes, the systems can be, there's lots of things with the
Yeah.
systems, but and that's where I love the conversation about capacity and agency, because because sometimes we have to maintain working in systems to pay our bills, right? And I think just remembering that, okay, remembering my body is breathing me. Okay, where's my hand on top of my head? All these different little things you can start with noticing proprioceptive awareness, noticing where my body is in space, can be a first layer to being able to engage and maybe even get out of some of the secondary trauma responses. Not that they're not real, because they are 100% real, but sometimes helping us
Yeah.
self-soothe into a space of clarity.
Right. That moves soothing moves us back to the prefrontal cortex, which is where you have
Right.
clarity. Yeah. It's like it's turning off the emergency alarm system and saying, you're good, nothing's happening, you're not in danger. Let's get back to thinking, right? Let's get back to the present.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then number 2 is make a plan. Okay. And I realize this is like huge, but like everybody loves the term make a plan, regardless of what system you work in. I feel like people really love it. So, the one thing I want to say about that is make a plan, a safety plan for yourself. That's what I always tell people. Make a self, we'll go into trauma informed yoga talk, self-regulation plan for yourself, because that's what it is. Okay. You can call it decision making if you want to. At the end of the day, this is coping strategies.
That's right.
Okay. For
Toolkit,
toxic stress. It is.
coping
This is what
toolkit.
it is.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, so make a plan for yourself. Okay. Like for me, work has been a little bit intense recently. I have like, I also am studying herbalism right now, like in a different section of my life, but that's for self-care for me. So I have this like giant, like traveling infuser now that I like travel around with like lemon balm and all these awesome like herbs in, and it has like made a shift in my day. I'm like, yes, there are herbs that are grounding right next to me. If someone really just pisses me off today, I'm gonna have a drink of that, and we know life will get at least 1/8% better in that moment. you
Yes.
know but
Yes.
it's always something like making a plan doesn't have to be huge. It can just be as much as like having herbs near you during the day, and or making a plan, maybe having like having like the box breathing, exercises, which can or cannot be helpful depending on your perspective on breath work, which is a whole other
Right.
thing. But if breath is a resource for
Right.
you, then box breathing can be helpful, right? So those are all like these little plans that you can have for yourself, for it's not an if, but a when you get activated.
Yeah,
So
one thing for me, I don't know why, and it's probably because I'm always experiencing it. It's dry mouth. So I like have my emotional support water bottle anyways because my stickers make me happy when I'm in a place. But I notice like I go to a lot of concerts and stuff. They don't always give you free water. They don't always let you bring in water, right? And for me, it's like doesn't matter how much money I'm gonna have to spend on water here. I have to have water. Like I'm not gonna be able to think, pay attention, talk to you, be nice if I am thirsty. And so it's like when I go somewhere and I can't bring my water bottle, and there are plenty places don't just let you bring in an open water. It's like one of the first things I have to look for. How am I going to access water? Because I'm going to need water all the time, and I'm going to be really uncomfortable and distracted by my dry mouth if I don't have water.
and you notice both those things, Sarah, we just said, was noticing your body.
Mhm.
Those are all those were all body awareness perspectives. Those are all, somatic practices. Somatic just means the body, noticing your body, noticing the needs you have in the body, right? To make a plan, So sometimes the plan is just as simple as water
Mhm.
or, a liquid, which is
Your
the
tea. Yeah.
commonality between us, And then it's also, like, sometimes for me, it's who can I call if I need some grounding? Because for me, that's important.
Mhm.
And so, like, I have a list of people that I call, when things just start to feel overwhelming, and I have them, I'll be like, "Hey, can we talk later? Can we have a plan to talk later?" I realize I can't always be available when but having a plan of people I can refer to,
Yeah.
at work or at personally, is kind of something that I use as a part of my plan. So it's like, and it's like physical, it's physical and then it's also emotional. So like we're kind of moving through our different needs as humans, right? As we make our plan. And then I'll create an action for later, whatever that is, so I can feel empowered and it with integrity. Those are my three things. So I want to always make whatever the next action is going to be something where I'm holding my integrity and there's some sort of empowerment to it.
Yeah. And like so me, like you're saying, recognizing the body function of dry mouth. And like that's just something I'm aware of. But here, I'm going to bring it back to self work. My self work has shown me that when I have dry mouth, I can't pay attention. I'm more
Mhm.
irritable. I don't care what somebody else has to say or what their needs are. So if I'm in a leadership space and I don't have water, like I'm gonna have to exit and get water before I can like probably come back and do anything because I'm just gonna be irritable if I don't. That's like taking a step further, right? Like a little bit what you're saying with the emotional. I'm aware of the physical, and then when that's uncomfortable, where does it put me emotionally? And then when I'm there emotionally, how do I show up with other people?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's it's that self-care plan, it's that tending to self, is a part of the plan, and then, for those of you that work with teams, you can go through this whole process. We were kind of highlighting how to work with yourself because like that's the first step. But also you can do this with teams. How do I do this with people?
Right.
That could be like a part 2 of this discussion is how do I then do this with other people? And that's why I like using like water or things like that, because sometimes all you can do is take a swig and you're like, okay, I hope I feel more enlightened in 2 seconds. And,
Right.
and then, you know what I mean? When you have a lot of people around you. And the other thing I think that's really important in those moments is sometimes the plan is pause.
Yeah.
We're going to take a 5-minute
Yep.
break, 10,
And not
15
do
minute, an
anything.
hour a day.
Right.
And we're just gonna pause, right? And I think that, as Katie Kurt says, practicing the pause
Mhm.
is part of a plan.
That's right.
It's part of a plan because sometimes you have to pause because if we're in reaction and we're reactive, we can't see other people or how they're responding to us. Sometimes the best plan you have is pause,
Yep.
okay? And then come back, as we say, circle back.
So
Yeah,
that's hard for
circle back,
people. It's hard. They
you
don't
know?
think to do it. And
Yeah,
what I find, like, especially, like in all my work with individuals is especially if they're showing up to a therapy room, they want to do something. Everybody wants to do
right.
something, whatever it is, right? I want to take a sip of water. I want to do this when really maybe it's just do nothing. Like just do nothing
Nothing is
for a little
something.
bit. Yep. And then wait. And that is really hard for people. They want to take an action.
They wanna take an action, right? And I think in our especially in the business world, we're like, "Action,
That's
impact,"
right.
we have all these things. Pausing is an action,
Yes.
Nothing is
Yes.
an action, nothing is something, and, that's a container. We're creating space. By not making, like, you know, super quick movement, for purposeful embodied movement, we're actually creating space for something else better, what did she say? Were our parents onto something?
That's a
Timeouts are
great
a
thing.
great thing.
Right? Give me one at work, please. I need a timeout.
Right,
Right, that'd
right.
be like,
See,
let's change the kinda let's reframe that to being a positive thing now, right? Yeah. It's a
right,
little me time over here in the corner.
right, right. So we don't do anything that's harmful later. It's gonna be the reframe. We're gonna do a timeout so we can minimize harm.
Yeah,
That's the reframe
yeah,
on the modern day
and
timeout.
come back into ourselves, right? Which if you think about little kids, that's true. Like, when they're, like, acting out all over the place, that's why we're putting them timeout, and we're hoping they're gonna calm down. I mean, we could facilitate that
Yeah.
differently, but that's
And
the idea.
there's a lot of research on that, what you just said, Sarah, about, gentle parenting and stuff like that, I mean, to a certain degree. So if you want to talk, there's like gentle parenting, the whole
A whole
practice
other
that's
thing.
come about
Yeah,
in recent years around that, because they're called calming corners
yeah.
now. So there's a whole body of work around that right now if you get on Instagram. So anyway, so those are our big takeaways. I'm just going to go through those really quickly. I'm just going to read them really quickly. So step 1 is identify activation, assess the spectrum of safeness, promote personal agency, evaluate capacity, make a plan, right? So, you know, um someone says learning to pause is so hard though. It goes against everything society says about hustle culture.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. It
It's
does. It goes
countercultural.
against
Trauma informed is countercultural right now too.
it
It's not
is.
the
It
way
is.
of
And
things. Yeah.
well, and to your point, Sarah, I think that the pause is what our nervous system needs too,
Mhm.
right? Like when we just keep going and going and going, like,
You're
I
operating out
mean,
of fear and danger.
I was in a position about a week and a half ago, not in a professional stance, thank God, but like, but I was definitely in a personal space with professionals around me who knew me professionally, but definitely in a personal arena where I was definitely like, I need to get out of here. I need to get out of here. I can't interact with any of you right now because I need to get out of here. Okay. And that's all I could think. And I'm so glad I did because I was like, and I even saw two people I deeply love in that process. And I just like went right by them because I knew I wasn't any good for them.
Right.
And then the next day we did a reparative thing, but I had no capacity for that
Right.
in that moment. you
And
know?
that takes like next level self-awareness. That takes right upskilling everything like what we're talking about. Like it's hard to be that aware of yourself in the moment and then be that aware to pause or make a decision. And I totally resonate with this with our participant that's talking about hustle culture. And that's the way systems are too. They just want to work you, work you, work you, work you. And nobody wants to stop to say, okay, wait a minute, I'm a human. I'm not a robot. Have capacity, have limits. I can't do everything, or at least I can't do everything today or this week, even if I could last week, because it's different for some reason.
And I think that the point of this and that framework we did is to give you spaces and to let you operationalize it for where you are at, right? Because I want everyone to understand that even if you're in spaces where there is something that where there's lots of bureaucracy above you, just to maybe consider going into curiosity around where can I find a little bit of a window of agency for me to make a plan for myself to experience a little bit of personal agency, a little bit of self-care customization, right?
In this moment
And
when nobody else is giving me it.
right. So that's kind of like the frame because sometimes these concepts can get really big and esoteric. And the point of this is to give you all an opportunity to operationalize it and to begin to execute it in ways that are good for you. So if you have any questions about that, like that is something that I can talk all day on. Sarah can also give examples and
Exactly.
talk on as well. Feel free to get a hold of us because that's the whole concept of what we're doing with Integrate is learning how to operationalize this. So no matter where you are, you have a plan for yourself and your team in those moments. And the teaming piece is a whole other one. We can do a part 2 on someday about this, how to work with this. But until we know it for ourselves, it's hard to hold space for it on a collective level.
Yeah, and I think
So
people don't even think of simple examples like you having some tea and me having some water, right? They want to think bigger than that, like that this is a much bigger concept, and it's like it's not. It's about me having water almost 24/7.
right. Or maybe it's just feeling your feet on the ground
Right.
too. Sometimes that's what I do when we're doing a pause, you know? I mean, I've done some group pausing a lot in the last year, and sometimes the only thing I'm doing in that moment because I don't have 5, I have like 5 minutes. I'm putting 2 feet on the ground, noticing where my body is in space, noticing 2 feet are on the ground, and just letting me know that I'm supported by the ground. And sometimes that's a huge reframe
Mhm.
is knowing that, especially as a leader, or someone that self leads, that I am supported by the ground physically.
Yeah.
And that can be seems simple, but really can be really radical too, to know that you're supported by the ground and that you can move forward in the best way possible. It's like the definition of trauma informed mindfulness is like learning to just notice the ground supporting you, right?
Right. And that's always there. Right, when nobody
Yeah.
else is supporting you, the ground is always there supporting you, so tuning into that. It's that's happening all the time, but we are not pausing on it to be aware of it, right? We're not stopping there and saying, well, there's value, and that's always there for me. I just don't always tune into it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, anyway, so we gave you some stuff, but the Headspace app is a good place to begin the work. If you're like, where do I start? Headspace app, the Calm
Calm
app.
app. I like the Calm app. I like the daily trip on there for people that just want to try to start paying attention because it's pretty light. They also do, the Headspace probably has this too, but when we talk about, like, if you're not into yoga or trauma informed yoga, you could still do a body scan or progressive muscle relaxation, which is just
Yeah.
you and yourself and tensing and releasing muscles. And both Headspace and Calm app have a plethora of options for body scans too. So you can get different narrators or different things and really find like what feels good to you. And then you have a guide if you're like not sure where to start with paying attention to your body.
Yeah, and sometimes maybe it's working, it's just having water near you.
Exactly.
Sometimes that's the first
That's
step. Start with water, download an app.
right. Right. Yes.
So anyway, so feel free, if you all have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Sarah. And yeah, and you can find out more about Integrate at www.let'sintegrate.org. And you can find the app, the visual again over here in the you can scan this to get the visual. So you can maybe have it, you can print it out in your office, put it on your computer, have the steps in front of you. That's how I am. So
And thank you for everybody who is watching and everybody who commented.
yeah,
We appreciate an
thank you,
audience.
Amy. I know it always says LinkedIn audience, so I'll respond to who is this. It says LinkedIn user whenever I'm on here.
Yes.
So Sarah and I will go back and respond to you all individually.
Yes.
So all right. Thank you all. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.